Hello and welcome to episode 147 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're talking about a little bit of snaking, a little bit of a drama that has been continued somehow in some way for four or 5 days now. We're also going to talk about the final week of the Major 1 qualifiers in the Call of Duty League. We're almost to land, but we got some online matches to play through before we can get to that. But before we get to any of those topics, how are you doing, Big?
I'm doing all right. Had a pretty long stream before this, playing some League of Legends. It was pretty tilting, so I'm ready for a break, step away from that, and talk some COD. We got some decent stuff to talk about. So yeah, let's get into it.
So one of the first things that we should probably talk about is Season 2 of Black Ops 6. It is coming January 28th, which I believe is, next Monday? And that will bring with it 5 multiplayer maps, 6+ new weapons, and some other stuff that really doesn't concern us necessarily. The thing that you mentioned to me before the show was the fact that Grind, a map from Black Ops 2, is a part of this new season. It's getting added in season, not at the beginning. But do you think this will be a competitive map? It wasn't in Black Ops 2, but I feel like we had an abundance of good maps that we didn't necessarily have to resort to. And I don't think in Black Ops 2 any, because I'm pretty sure that was a DLC. So I don't think that was a part of like the COD scene back then. Like they really didn't mess with DLC maps. So do you think it could be a competitive map now?
I think it could, mostly due to the fact that there are some issues with the current map pool that seemingly players are wanting to see if there's any decent replacements. So I think the answer is yes, it could be a replacement. I don't know if it actually will be, just because, like you said, there's really no precedent. It's not like this is a raid or a standoff where you can throw it in day one without testing. Like, obviously next Tuesday when the season drops, that's going to be like 3 days before Major 1. So they're not going to be playing it at all then, but maybe they could test it like in that very small week/10-day break before the Major 2 qualifiers start. I think they start on Valentine's Day or like February 14, 15, somewhere in there. So maybe they'll try it out. I mean, there's also the possibility there are a couple other 6v6 maps in here: Bounty, Dealership, and Lifeline. I also just realized though it says Grind is coming in season, so it won't be at the launch of season 2. It'll be the season 2 Reloaded update probably. So getting a little ahead of ourselves, I guess. So probably it won't be in the CDL anytime soon. That's obviously not in the game. We gotta wait, but it's interesting that this is the like quote unquote remake map that's coming back. We've heard some rumors, and I don't even know if it's really rumors at this point. It's more so like just people really want some of those classic maps in again. But you have that fine line between wanting to see raid, standoff, etc., versus having to rely on those maps consistently and just having them return over and over again and getting stale for the other part of the community, like the casual players and stuff like that. So not entirely sure. Even when Grind is officially added, if it will become a part of the map pool, it could very well be tested. But there really isn't a precedent for it being a competitive map for it to just automatically be thrown in. But if there's like issues, like we talked very briefly last episode about like that spawn where I think it was Mac literally saw Lucky spawn right in front of him on Skyline. Like if that starts happening more, some of the pros will probably be on board with trying to find a hardpoint map to replace Skyline. So one of these new maps from season 2, we got Bounty, Dealership, and Lifeline is 6v6 maps coming at the start. It looks like and then Bullet and Grind would be in season. Lifeline is listed as 6v6 and 2v2, so that makes me think it's a pretty small map. It kind of looks like the hijacked boat. I don't think it's actually the hijacked boat, but that's what it kind of looks like. So anyway, we'll have to see, maybe Bounty or Dealership get a shot and get some testing and scrims and whatnot. But obviously, again, those are new maps, and based on the precedent of new maps in newer COD titles, not necessarily a guarantee that there'll be a home run. So we'll have to wait and see once season 2 drops what there is to what we got to deal with, and we'll go from there.
I thought that Lifeline looked like hijacked from Black Ops 2, and I also thought that Bullet, at least from the image, looked like Express from
It looks
Black
like
Ops
yeah,
2.
yeah.
So maybe they're based on that or just completely different, and it's just kind of a coincidence. I think it's a pretty big coincidence that those two maps in particular are Treyarch maps, and maybe just the images, they want you to think like, oh, okay, maybe I should check these out, even if they're not completely the same. But both of those are not hijacked, obviously, but actually I do remember hijacked being an S&D map, like at the very beginning of the game. And
back when the PDW was meta.
Yeah, so I mean, that was an incredible map, all things considered, and Express was an S&D map and a hardpoint map. If I think it might have been all three, to be honest. Now I'm thinking about it. Maybe CTF wasn't in it, but I'm pretty sure hardpoint.
No, it was.
It was. Yeah, that was a competitive map.
At least for part of the season.
Yeah, that was a map back then for competitive. We'll see if Bullet is something like that. But like you said, it's a 2v2 map, which you would think like Lifeline would be a smaller map in total, so it's probably not. But we'll see what happens with all of that.
I will. I just went to the blog to check too, and it does say Grind and Bullet are mid-season. Just to give like a size breakdown, it says Grind is medium sized. So for those who have played that in either Black Ops 2 or Black Ops 4 before, you have a pretty good idea of how big that map is. It's not huge, it's not small, but it's not, I would say, like on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the smallest and 10 being the biggest map, it's probably closer to like a 4 or a 3. Like it's not like a perfect medium-sized map. Like I'd consider like Raid like a good medium-sized map. I think this is a little smaller than that. And just so
weird.
For what?
The map is pretty weird because there's all those different like nooks and crannies almost.
Yeah.
Where they're like, it's a skate park, so it's literally like little alleyways, which I think if you're looking at a competitive point of view, that would be really annoying because there's a bunch of different rooms there. In the mid part of the thing, there's like a small window at the top that you can see in. I think that would probably cause a bit of issues, but that's beside the point, I guess.
But so they have Bullet and Lifeline, obviously, since they're 2v2 and 6v6, they make sense they're listed as small sized. So Lifeline 1000% will not be a competitive map. They have like a mini map version of it in the blog post here, and there's just no shot. It's a 1-lane map, not even a 3-lane map. But then Dealership and Bounty are both listed as medium sized, so that means there's a shot that it could be. If I would say small size maps aren't going to have any real chance to be in the map pool, I would guess. But medium size, and looking at these images in they just shown like the mini map overlay for Bounty, it's a really square map and it looks pretty balanced. I mean, it's kind of symmetrical, not like perfect, but it's not. I mean, there's a lot of buildings and stuff, so I don't know how and it looks like there's probably some underground sections. So I don't know how that build, but it's a rectangle size wise, and then Dealership is kind of like it's not like a Z, but it's kind of like a it's a parallelogram or whatever it is. It's got like the 2 slashes, and then so it's like a rectangle kind of on a slant, but it's got some interesting outline to it, and it kind of, just from the outline in the mini map, it has some like, I don't know how to describe it. It just the mini map portions kind of look like on Invasion, how that P1 or the B Dom flag in the middle is kind of like a construction site. So it's not like an actual building. It's kind of like got those walls for an unfinished construction. That's what it kind of looks like in the middle of the map here. Um, so I don't know. Obviously, we'll still have to wait and see what how they actually play and if they even give them a shot. But again, those Bounty and Dealership are newer maps, so brand new maps. I mean, so we have no idea until we actually play them if they'll even be worth testing. And then, COD Pros, it might not even see the light of day in testing. But we'll have to see. But season 2 on the way next week. Got a chance for another map pool refresher, but we'll have to actually cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah, for sure. Christopher Mendez, thank you for tuning into the stream. I appreciate you. The other thing that I really wanted to talk about was the snaking stuff, because we talked about it a little bit on the Sunday show after the matches. And it's kind of like developed into its own storyline as the week has gone on, because people are trying to now bring evidence forward to say that Dashy was in fact not snaking during their match over the weekend. I mean, but then you have Scrap on the other hand saying, I think his exact words were, just because 10,000 people who don't play the game say it's not snaking doesn't mean that it's not snaking, kind of. And I get his point of view. I get Dashy's point of view. One thing I think that we should all keep in mind is, like, it just doesn't matter. Didn't the ban already happen? So the punishment, and we were talking about, I think, a little bit on Sunday about this. The punishment ended up being that OpTic had a 1-day scrim ban. So basically they blacklisted them for a day. Like, how much that really affects you, it's remains to be seen. But I'm pretty sure the punishment has already happened. I think the blacklist was something that they did earlier this week, if I'm not mistaken. What are we arguing about? Is it just that maybe the next time this happens or doesn't happen to OpTic, it's not a 2-day ban, it goes back to a 1-day ban? Like, what are the repercussions? Or are we just kind of like, I don't know, like, it just feels pointless to argue about, like, did he snake or did he not? Like, I mean, I'm sure it looked like that, and from the other team's point of view, I'm sure when they saw it, they're probably like, yeah, that's snaking for sure. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on this kind of controversy that has pretty much been looped into every, like, current and former pro player has decided to weigh in on the topic.
Yeah, I kind of, I get what you're saying, like, especially if I'm pretty sure, I'm gonna have to check this tweet from Shotzi. I think all he did say was that they did get banned, but I'm not 100% sure if it did happen or not, but I would assume it's already happened and done and over with, so it is what it is. Um, but I do think that's just, we kind of touched on this last episode. I think it's the bigger conversation around how to properly police this or attempt to police this, and that's always, whether it's snaking or in other games where you couldn't tell what attachment people had on guns because it didn't like list them in the kill cam or stuff like that. Um, just all these like unofficial rules for stuff that aren't officially banned by the CDL and the in-game rules, how you can properly police them and effectively hold people accountable to GAs, however you want to phrase it. That's always going to be a question, and I think that's the bigger thing around this. It's not necessarily, I think it's a bigger deal because it is Dashy and it is OpTic. So naturally, a lot of Greenwall fans are going to come to his defense, whether it is snaking or isn't. Like, Greenwall players are obviously going to say, oh, no, he didn't snake, like, blah, blah. And I do think there's a different conversation to be had about how much that one snaking actually had an impact on the map. Because if I remember correctly, OpTic, it wasn't like a 250, 249 hard point on Skyline where, and that was like a kill. And I don't even know if he got a kill. It happened in the middle of the map, probably like the second rotation of hard points. So not even sure how much it actually had an impact on the game. But like you bring up the example pretty frequently, like round 11, game 5, round 11, COD champs. Like you show somebody's POV of them snaking multiple times to get that kill and that 500,000 or whatever check. Um, that's a different scenario. So I think that's what this whole drama, dilemma, however you want to phrase it. The bigger conversation around it is just like making sure we stay consistent. If the ban for a first time offense is going to be 1 day of scrims, whether you're OpTic or Vegas Falcons, if X amount of pros are convinced you were snaking, then it's just you're going to deal with that 1 day ban. And now we'll have to see, maybe something happens again. Moving forward, now we know Sib and Dashy have, you know, are guilty for how it sounds dramatic, but they've been caught snaking. And as far as we know, they've both been given the 1 day ban. So now what happens going forward if someone on C9 or Sib or someone on OpTic or Dashy gets caught snaking again? Is it a 3 day ban? Is it a 2 day ban from scrims? Like what do we do? And just staying consistent with that and trying. I mean, because at the end of the day, they just it's snaking or all this stuff is never going to be completely out of the game until the developers just make it impossible, which isn't going to happen, or in terms of breaking GAs on gun attachments and stuff, until the GAs become official rules, like that's going to be hard to police. So there's all these fine lines and whatnot that just make it super difficult, but doing the best that the pros can to try and be fair. Like I said, whether it's OpTic or Vegas Falcons doing this, they want to. I mean, everybody, fans and pros and coaches alike, they want it to be uniform and have the punishment fit the crime, and whoever it is doing it, if you say X person snaked, found enough people agree that it's a snake, then you hit them with that 1 day scrim ban, and then second offense you go from there. I do think it is kind of interesting, like you said, that this is drawn out as long as it has. But like I said, I do think a big factor in that is the fact that it was Dashy and was the OpTic. So I did think, for what it's worth too, I obviously haven't been playing a ton of Black Ops 6 outside of zombies. I haven't played any ranked, so I haven't really like seen the animation firsthand or snaked a ton myself on like some of those maps and whatnot. I did think it was kind of interesting though that Scrap said the clip that JP tweeted like looked worse. It did kind of like, there was like, I don't think speed burst is the right word, but there was kind of like just like a little weird bit of movement before. It wasn't as much as like a quick up down sort of thing. It was kind of like kind of like a ledge slide or something like that. It looked like to me like the same sort of animation you would get if you were doing that before he went into the quote unquote snake. So I thought it was interesting. Scrap said that looked worse than a more traditional snake if he was just at a head glitch doing it like 5 times repeat. Then like that's pretty kind of like what Sib did. Like I mean anybody who's saw that is kind of like, yeah, that's a snake. But so yeah, it was interesting. Scott's basically like, yeah, all these people who don't play the game don't know that actually looked worse. And I was like, so I thought that was kind of interesting. So we'll have to see. But yeah, well, I don't think there will be much more from this particular incident, at least as far as I know. But we'll have to see. Hopefully this just sets the precedence, and end of the day, the goal is to just not have to deal with this. And if everyone just doesn't snake, then we don't have to deal with any of this, right? So we'll see what happens from here.
I think they should just start cutting off an inch of your thumb every time you snake. Like, we just get the entire league together, majority rules, whether you are sentenced to your inch decapitation or whatever the thumb is, and take it off, and then you'll be down to a nub, and then you won't be able to snake as much. I think that's the only way to really get through this. From what I saw from that clip, I can see his argument of like, well, did I really snake or whatever. I think like it's borderline, and like you mentioned and like Scrap mentioned, I bet it looked 1,000 times worse on the other end because that's how Call of Duty is. Like, just because on your screen it doesn't look bad, or and this isn't just related to snaking, like throwing shoulders and stuff like that stuff is ridiculous on the other end, especially online, I'm sure. So that kind of stuff, it would make sense that Scrappy's like, that was horrible on my end. Like, you were just snaking the hell out of me. Yeah, and the clip that JP posted, it was on the first rotation, I think, or on the first hard point, because it's like 10-0. And
Oh, okay.
so it's like, I think it's kind of blown out of
Yeah, I see it
proportion in
now. Yeah,
general.
yeah.
But like you mentioned, it's because it's OpTic, it's Dashy, it's LAT. It was the match. It went to a game 5. So like everything kind of played into this. If it was a 3-0 sweep either way, I don't think people really care all that much. Um, but yeah, it's all kind of silly. My favorite tweet from this incident was a reply to JP by Illy. He said, "That's clean, but very, very dirty." So
Yeah.
that's a good way to put it. Yeah, so we'll see if anything comes of it or anything more. It seems like snaking or some kind of drama around it pops up like every month or so, like every major cycle. It feels like there's something, but I don't think anything will be done. So it doesn't feel like we should care all that much.
My favorite tweet was more, it's more a thread, but TJ, who obviously played with Dashy on OpTic back in the Black Ops 4 season there when it was 5v5. Dashy replied to the JP tweet saying dirty player, and then at season 0914, who has a like blank Twitter Avi profile picture, replies to TJ saying dirty player with "you're a fat player" with the wrong "your." And then Dashy replies with 5 laughing emojis to that guy. And TJ goes, LMAO, you couldn't tweet that on main, had to use the burner. I'm crying. So I just thought that was, obviously, I don't think that's actually Dashy's burner, or I mean, maybe Dashy has burner, maybe he doesn't. I don't know. But I just thought that was a funny interaction nonetheless.
Let's get into these matches. So we have a bunch of qualifying matches. The final qualifying matches of Major 1. And like I mentioned on the last episode of the podcast, these matches, while they are online and they're just kind of run of the mill qualifiers, these are obviously the most important matches that we've had to this point in the season because they directly dictate what Major 1 will look like in terms of who gets into the winner's bracket, who gets in the loser's bracket, and the seeding. There's a lot of seeding implications going on this weekend in these qualifier matches. And let's start with a team that really kind of needs a win, and that's the Vancouver Surge. They play on Friday, January 24th in the opener against the Carolina Royal Ravens, who are coming in off of their first loss. You mentioned on the last episode how and I think you said that Nameless had said this, was that their hard point had looked a little lackluster recently, and that had been kind of an issue. Obviously, they get second at the minor. They lose to, I believe it was the Boston Breach. They lose to Snoopy in the revenge match. And now they're, not really in danger of going into the loser's bracket, I don't think. But certainly not having momentum, not having kind of the wind at your back, so to speak, does seem like a pretty valid concern for these Royal Ravens. And then Vancouver on the other side would really benefit from a win here. Who do you have with Carolina and Vancouver?
I gotta go with Carolina. I mean, there's just I just feel like, despite whatever's going on with their hard point and whatnot, they've still been a better team than Vancouver. I still don't really have a good gauge of what kind of team Vancouver is, and how how to rate them, how to you know how effective they're going to be as a squad. It seems like they're a little bit in towards the bottom in the middle of the pack, and then Carolina's just they were playing well before the holiday break and whatnot. So if you're looking at this from a Vancouver perspective, maybe this is just a good chance to cause a quote unquote upset because you're not playing Carolina when they're undefeated 4-0 and looking like one of the possible contenders for Major One. You're playing them when they maybe are, thinking, going over some stuff, thinking hitting the blackboard, or just hitting the VOD, trying to figure out what they were doing wrong and stuff. So it might be a good opportunity for Vancouver to catch them slipping, or catch them, just not at their best right now. It's certainly, you can't say they're at their best just based on what we've seen this year. But I still think Carolina has been the better team this year in the small sample size. So give me the Royal Ravens.
Yeah, I'll go with Carolina as well. I should mention real quick that 5 teams have already qualified for the winners bracket at Major One. So
Yeah.
no matter the results of this weekend, these 5 teams will start in the winners bracket. The Toronto Ultra, who are the only undefeated team remaining heading into this weekend, they only have 1 match. So, as likely as it can get to finish this Major One qualifiers with a 7-0 record. Then you have OpTic Texas, LA Thieves, Carolina, and Boston. Those are the 5 teams that have already clinched a winner's bracket spot. Of course, the seeding is still to be determined. We'll see if any of that changes. And so that means we also have 7 teams competing for. Well, okay, Vegas is out basically, like for sure. So we have 6 teams competing for 3 winner bracket spots, and most of these teams, or I think half of these teams, have 2 matches this weekend. So a lot of movement can happen in that bottom 7 or so. So yeah, Vancouver's one of them. They're 2-3 right now. They're tied for 6th. So if they win out, they get in, and they're good. It just is going to be an uphill battle to get there for sure for Vancouver.
We'll talk about it in a little bit here, but there's one match in particular coming up that I think is going to determine who will or won't. Actually, no, it's not fair to say. But there's a match here coming up between 2 teams that it could implicate which one starts in winners bracket and which one doesn't.
Next up, we have Miami and LAT. Not a match that you would really think a ton about, but LAT is at their most vulnerable at this moment. And that's not saying much because they were not showing any vulnerabilities before the Christmas break. But they're coming in off of that minor loss that we talked about a few weeks ago. Then they lose to OpTic this past weekend. There's all the talk about Scrappy and then all the snaking stuff that we just discussed. But LAT has not been at their best these last 2 weekends. And again, they're not in danger of falling out of that top 8 and starting in the losers bracket by any means. But I feel like momentum is a big thing in Call of Duty, and LAT does not have the momentum right now. Miami, on the other hand, does need to keep picking up wins. They're very much in the same position as Vancouver, where another win would go a very, very long way for them. That being said, I'm going to go with the LA Thieves.
Yeah, I think it's similar, description wise to just that Carolina Vancouver match before this. It's like, Miami isn't playing this LA Thieves team at their strongest. You might be able to look at this as a decent opportunity to cause an upset, but despite whatever's been going on with LA Thieves and the loss to OpTic, you still think highly of this team, and they should be able to handle a team like Miami that really hasn't, shown us that they are capable of taking down a team like LA Thieves. So, who knows? Maybe again, I'd say it all the time. Super Saiyan Real, he shows up, they got a shot. But even when he does show up, sometimes it's not enough. So I'm just give me LA Thieves here.
Last match on Friday is the Boston Breach versus Atlanta FaZe, which is honestly just a banger of a match with how Boston has played this season, how Atlanta played for the first 2 weeks of the season, and they've looked a lot better these last 2 weekends. That being said, they're still not in a good position right now. They have 2 matches this weekend, so they definitely control their own destiny in that regard. But they are 2-3 heading into the final weekend of the qualifiers, and they certainly need, it feels like, at least 1 win to really put them over the top, and then obviously 2 wins would essentially clinch them a spot, I believe. But Boston is, they have a chance if all things go well this weekend, they have a chance to finish the qualifiers 6-1, which I don't think anybody could have predicted. They have looked really, really good. I'm going to go with Atlanta FaZe because
Boo.
they have shown to be the Atlanta FaZe that we have expected of them. But the Boston Breach have been, everything and more so far this season.
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought there might have been a slight chance you were gonna go with your boy Snoopy after hyping him up so much last week. Um, but no, yeah, you gotta give me Atlanta FaZe here. Obviously, it's awesome what Boston's been able to do early on. I mean, I just went back. They went 6-27 last year in the CDL regular season. Um, so literally, like you said, they got a shot to go 6-1. They play two very tough teams this week in qualifiers, so I don't expect them to end with 6 wins. But let's just say they do end with 6 wins, they would match their total wins from last year in the first set of qualifiers this year. So, and I think I kind of chuckled earlier when you were going over the teams that are like already locked into winners bracket, and you were like, it doesn't know, we don't know what the seeds are yet, but these teams are in the winners bracket. And you say Boston Breach, and I'm like, wow, I mean, you couldn't even say that at any point last year. They came in last in every LAN outside of the Esports World Cup, right? So, if you're a Boston Breach fan, you got to be happy with what you've seen so far. But this is a test this week. Obviously, happy. Got to be happy you're in winners bracket, and you don't have to face the dreaded one series and go home. Especially flying for the guys in the U.S. flying across across the pond or whatever it is, flying to Europe here. So jet lag and all that stuff's gonna be happening, and that's a long flight to just go over and play one series and then have it be all done and over with, and just become a tourist for the next couple days after that. So, yeah, this is going to be a tough week for Boston, but it's a good test for them, and it should, at the end of this set of qualifiers, we should have a better idea, I think, of what this Boston team is truly capable of. So I'm excited for that aspect of these qualifiers here.
And Boston has kind of met the challenge every single step of the way so far this season. They have lost before, I believe once in the qualifiers, once in the minor, but they've been really competitive against every team they played. They've beaten OpTic. They've beaten some really good teams, Carolina last weekend as well. So I think, like you said, this is a good test. And if Boston, again, let's say they beat FaZe, then that's a huge win. Are we thinking that Boston is like a legitimate, not like a championship contender, because we have to see a little bit more, but like they're like probably a solid champs team at that point is what I would be thinking. Granted, there's a lot of season to be played, but a win against FaZe with, coupled with wins over OpTic and Carolina would prove the Boston Breach and the Snoopy project, I guess, as kind of a correct one at this point, which I will take my victory lap very happily. Next up, we have the Saturday, January 25th matches, starting with Vancouver and Minnesota. These two teams really need to win. I think this could decide the fate of one of these teams and put them in the losers bracket, unfortunately, because Minnesota right now, they only have this match this weekend. So they are 2-4. They are on a 4-match losing streak after starting the qualifiers 2-0. So they finished, really strong, or started really strong, and they have just kind of fallen off a cliff a little bit recently, at least in the qualifying matches, because they did look decent in the minor, of course, and it just really hasn't translated to these specific matches. But they're going to need to win this. I don't know exactly. Maybe they could get in. I don't know. Like if Miami, Vancouver, and Atlanta, or one of them finishes 2-5, I'm not sure what the tiebreaker would turn out to be, or if LAG or C9 tiebreak. But like that's a lot of hoping and a lot of wishing, and I just don't think that they're gonna get in on the tiebreakers. So they're gonna really need a win here, almost guaranteed. Vancouver, like we mentioned, they are 2-3, so they have 2 matches, one on Friday, one on Saturday. They definitely need at least one win to kind of get them into the winners bracket. I'm going to go with Vancouver. I don't think that there's a gigantic difference between these teams. I think they're both pretty. Both have flaws, I would say, and I think is probably just going to come down to who makes the fewest mistakes. And I'm going to think it's Vancouver for whatever reason.
Yeah, no, definitely happy to have you pick Vancouver and switch it up a little, even if it turns out to be a bad pick for me. I'm going to go Minnesota. This is the match I was talking about earlier, though. Like, assuming Vancouver loses to Carolina, which I guess you can't really assume that as a guarantee. But let's just, for the uh, you know, lack of certainty at this point, let's just assume they lose that they'll fall to 2-4, and this would be a 2-4 versus 2-4 game, and it seems like 3 is going to be that number that gives you that better shot. Like you said, 2-5, it's going to come down to tiebreakers, and I don't even know at the end of the day if any 2-5 team gets in. Maybe one team will squeak in at 2-5 in the 8 seed. Um, but definitely 3-4 puts you in a much better position. And with so many teams at 2 wins right now, you got to think like 3 gives you a better shot to get one of those last spots in the winners bracket. And I just think, like you said, obviously, the qualifiers haven't really gone Minnesota's way, but they had their moments in the minor, and I've seen them, seen what they're capable of. They have that resilience and the ability to pull off a reverse sweep, even if the series doesn't start their way, for whatever reason. So I'm gonna go with Minnesota. I just think they're the better team right now. But this could be a good one, and like I said, I think assuming Vancouver loses to Carolina, it'll effectively become a battle for a winner's bracket spot, and the other team will fall into that scenario that I said, where they could possibly fly all the way to Madrid just to play one series. So, going to be an exciting one, I think.
Next up, Vegas versus LAG. I was just gonna say LAG and then move on, but I don't want to, give anybody like the little disrespect or whatever. I'm still gonna go with LAG. I
Yeah.
think you are as well. But
Yep.
Vegas has proven to be competent, and I think they've won. I don't know if they've won a control, but I'm pretty sure they've won a hard point and a S&D at this point. So if they can just put a control together and
Have
you
they
know,
won a hard?
I think so. I thought so. Maybe not. But it's
Um,
either way they've been very competitive, and they
yeah.
definitely should have won a hard point if they haven't, because they lost that one to OpTic, which was ridiculous. So
Or exit drops 50.
yeah. So I'm gonna go with LAG.
uh, I'm trying to look up quick on. No, they're 0-11 in hard point.
All right, take back everything I said. I'm going
Three
with
and
Vegas. No,
three
LAG.
and four in S&D and 1-6 in control, according to Breaking Point. I do not remember who they beat in control. That's interesting. Um, might have been last weekend though, in which case I feel really dumb. But this does, yeah, it says 0-11 in hard point for Vegas. But yeah, I mean, you look at the standings. 0 and whatever Vegas is now, 0-6 versus 1-5. Like, you take the names out of it, just looking at the standings, like, this is one of those chances that they could be a winnable match for Vegas if they are really able to put some stuff together and take advantage of the slow start for Gentlemates. But end of the day, I just think this Gentlemate squad is really, I don't want to say they're about to turn a corner, but I think they're at least on the verge of showing a better showing than what we saw necessarily in the first couple weeks. I highlighted it last episode, but the just the potential for Priesthood to be on a third sub on a map like Skyline could really be a catalyst for um, some more success for this Gentleman's team. So that's a map, unless it's vetoed by Vegas, I would expect to see Skyline Hardpoint in this uh, map set. And then obviously, if Vegas actually is 0-11 in Hardpoint, that's one that you got to favor Gentlemates in. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it could be a closer match than maybe some people might have anticipated before the season. Um, but I still just think General Mates has the edge here. And then kind of like you said, I don't want to just say LAG and move on. So we got to got to show at least some some attention to all the matches.
Yeah, I think we did that last year where we were like whoever Boston played, we were like, yeah, it's them, and then I think Boston ended up winning that match.
I mean, hey, maybe we get to that point if in the major four qualifiers Vegas is 0-20 something, like maybe we'll get to that point. But until, I mean, they've been competitive in some of these series, and I do honestly think they're gonna eventually get a win at some point this season. So we'll have to see.
I'm not waiting that long. Like after Major 1, I'm just saying the other team, and that's like
Right?
actually no disrespect or anything, but it's like I'm just not gonna pick Vegas. Like like I'm not gonna even keep up the charade that like, oh, I was considering the Falcons or whatever. Like think if they start 0-7 in the qualifiers, get first rounded at the major, like I don't know what circumstances I would have to pick Vegas in a match. Like maybe if like Atlanta FaZe puts like everybody gets like the flu or something and like their internet is like they're in a snowstorm or whatever, maybe I would go with Vegas, but I just don't feel like I have any circumstance where I would pick Vegas against a current CDL team. So no disrespect though. Miami versus Carolina is the last match on Saturday. We'll see what Carolina does in their first match. Miami also plays a really tough schedule this week against LAT and then Carolina. Not the week necessarily or the schedule that you would want when you really need at least one win to get into the winner's bracket. I'm going to go with the Royal Ravens. I think you are as well. But I think this has a potential to be a pretty big upset. Miami has they're kind of frisky. I wouldn't say that they're I just think they're a middle of the pack team, and Carolina has not proven to be like so untouchable that they can't lose this kind of match.
Sure. No, I think that's fair. I'm gonna go with Carolina, like you said, but yeah, this is one. You look at it from a record perspective, like you said, Miami plays that opening match against LAT. Again, we don't want to assume, it's a guarantee, but let's just assume they lose to LAT. That put them at 2-4, and then they're in that scenario again where they gotta try and get that third win. And technically, it'll be against a team in Carolina who is one of those teams you said that's already in winners bracket. So maybe just again here to play devil's advocate and just throw some stuff out there as potential occurrences. We heard that talk and stuff about at least on the desk them questioning Carolina's hard point. Maybe this is a very small chance for Carolina to try some new hard points out or switch some stuff up in the vetoes or whatever it might be, just because they know they're in winners bracket and worst case scenario they're still going to get 2 series on land. Feels a little early in the season to bring that up as a possibility, but it is a possibility. So we'll have to see what happens there. I will be just looking in general to see how Carolina plays in hardpoint in both of their matches this weekend, regardless. But yeah, this is a tough one for Miami again. But you look at this, just talking about these matchups out loud here. Like we're looking at Miami potentially 2-5. That Vancouver and Minnesota team, whoever loses that head to head, possibly at 2-5. Then if General Mates beats Vegas, they'd be 2-5. So there is a realistic possibility that 2-5 can get you into that 8 spot, depending on the tiebreakers and how the map win loss shakes up. So this is even a realistic scenario where Miami doesn't win this match against Carolina, but maybe they steal one map here and one map in the other series, and then they're 2-5 with a slightly better map record than one of those other 2-5 teams. Not sure, but that definitely throws a interesting twist into it. But again, Super Saiyan Real could show up. Yeah, this could technically be a revenge match. Not really, just because the visa situation and everything last year.
His revenge is against the United States government, I believe.
Yeah. But Yeah, I'm gonna go with Carolina.
Sunday, January 26th, the last three matches of the Major 1 qualifiers, the Boston Breach versus the LA Thieves. A schedule from hell for Boston to end on, Atlanta and LAT to finish. I'm going to go with LAT, but, like, it's pretty much everything that I mentioned for the Boston Atlanta match. Like, the Breach have looked really good to this point. LAT has not looked great recently. I that's not a unrealistic scenario where Boston wins this. So I'm gonna go with LAT, but I'm very excited for this one.
No, and then that's what we were talking about earlier, right? Like Boston playing against Atlanta, playing against LA Thieves. It's just two matches that are going to be good tests, and will be interesting to see what kind of fight they put up, especially if there is a quote unquote weaker version of LAT showing up right now. But end of the day, I still think LAT is the better team, so I'm going to go with the Thieves.
Next up, Atlanta versus Cloud9. I don't think like the internet should have too much of an issue because Atlanta is actually based in Atlanta, and I think the big issue for Cloud9 was the Dallas teams, where they wouldn't have like a good server in the middle for those, like because they couldn't use Denver or whatever. I think they should be able to use some kind of like Midwest or like Texas server for this one, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Still, I'm going to go with Atlanta because I just think they're the better team. I have no idea where Cloud9 is going right now. Like they're at a real crossroads where it could get really bad, and this could turn into like, are we looking at a Pred watch kind of situation? Because it feels like the team that would seem the most logical and fit for Pred, obviously with all of the former teammates and everything there. They also seem like they're more willing to spend because they were going to bring back the NYSL roster, which seemed pretty expensive at the time, obviously having won a championship just a few years ago. So I think it could be a Pred situation there. But before we get to that, like they have to probably start playing well. They look like they're kind of destined to finish in that bottom four and start in
Yeah.
the losers bracket and probably get first rounded. Like it's going to be a really tough battle for them regardless if they're in the winners or losers bracket. But they only have one match this week and it's against Atlanta, so that's not a great position to be in. So I'm going to go with FaZe.
Yeah, I'm gonna take Atlanta too, but I mean, it's definitely again just to have something to talk about and play devil's advocate here. This before the minor, Atlanta was struggling in these qualifiers, and record wise, C9 hasn't been great, but we know what they're capable of in terms of just the talent on that roster and everything like that. So internet issues aside, like I think this could be a closer match than maybe some people anticipate, but I still think it's one Atlanta should win. Um, I don't want to, again, we kind of are just, especially we both picked Atlanta against Boston, both pick them here against C9. They're still technically 2-3 in these qualifiers, and in a world where they lose both of these matches to Boston and C9, they'd be 2-5, and then if C9 beats Atlanta, C9 would be 2-5, so that would cause some crazy tiebreakers. So it will be interesting, and I think Atlanta, um, I don't want to say they're totally got their stuff together and totally are back in, the form that we expect them to be, but it's definitely more encouraging signs than what was happening earlier in the season. So I do think um, Atlanta's just the safer pick right now, but there could be some weird scenarios that pop up out of these qualifiers. I feel like that always happens where we sit here, we talk about this stuff, and then the Sunday comes or whenever we do our show in previous years after the last week qualifiers is like, holy shit, X happened, and that just totally threw everything that we talked about out the window. Um, so I don't know. Something's telling me maybe some funky stuff could happen here with these 2-5 teams, and there is a world where both these Atlanta and C9 could end 2-5. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but we'll have to see.
It's not that unrealistic. Like maybe Atlanta doesn't finish 2-5, but it's
Yeah,
very realistic that like Minnesota, LAG, C9 could finish 2-5, and maybe Miami or something along those lines. Like it could be a 3-4 way tie for eighth place, and then it's like, all right, like what are we doing here? Those tiebreakers are gonna get crazy if it's anything past two teams. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with Atlanta right now, and this was not the case like a month ago. But Atlanta right now is the safer pick than Cloud9. C9 is they're 8-16 in map count so far this season. So they have the second worst map count in the league. Obviously, they're 1-5 in the matches. They looked, I think, better in the minor, if I'm not mistaken. I'm kind of like losing my marbles, I guess, right now. I can't really even think of the minor and everything that went on there, but they just haven't looked good, and not nearly to the level that we thought a team like this, with the players like this, could get to. And yeah, I just kind of am already looking ahead, but maybe they aren't, and maybe they come to play this weekend, and maybe they force a weird tiebreaker and somehow sneak into the winners bracket, because that's actually the only way they can get into the winners bracket now. Is kind of a team a tiebreaker with a bunch of teams, and I don't know exactly who they'd have to tie with to get in, but they can only get to 2 and 5, and it's just not a realistic or likely scenario for them.
And they're even, I mean, Cloud9's 8-16 map count according to the standings from the CDL posted. So even a world where Cloud9's 3-0s Atlanta FaZe, they'd be 2-5 with an 11-16 map count. And 11-16 is Minnesota's current map count. So that means they would have to get swept by Vancouver to not have more map wins. Vancouver is 11-12, so that would mean Vancouver can't win a single map this weekend. Miami is 12-11 map count, so they already have an edge there in just like the single map count. So yeah, I mean it's really not looking good for Cloud9's winner bracket chances right now.
Yeah, and their only other win right now is over Minnesota, so they kind of need Minnesota to lose to kind of, because then they would have the edge in that. Like, it's just a bunch of BS that probably won't end up happening, but I think it's probably important to at least note before we get into this. Toronto versus OpTic is the final match on Sunday, January 26th. Yeah, they decided after last week where they're like, yeah, OpTic LAT, that's second to last. We don't need that match to go on as the final match. They're deciding to finish off with a potential first place matchup here. Because Toronto is in first, they are 6-0. OpTic is 5-1 heading into this. So like those records will not change until they meet. It just kind of depends on like what happens with LAT, what happens with Carolina and Boston, because those teams realistically could get to 6-1, and then who knows what tiebreakers could happen at the top. But if Toronto wins, they will be the number one seed for Major 1, as they'll be the only undefeated team. OpTic, if they win, they have a very good shot, especially with a win over Toronto. But we'll see. It's just a very interesting matchup regardless, because if you look at the qualifiers, these two teams have the longest win streaks in the qualifiers as well. Obviously, Toronto has won all 6. OpTic lost their first match of the season to the Boston Breach and have won 5 straight since. And they, these are two of the top teams in terms of map count as well. So a lot of things pointing toward an incredible match. I'm going to go with OpTic. I think it's a pretty close matchup regardless. Toronto has looked, it's a hard point, right? Like hard point has been their map or their mode to this point. Obviously, OpTic historically has been a good respawn team. We'll see how that holds up. And Hook had a very, very good weekend last weekend, and that helped OpTic tremendously to get, I believe, a 2-0 weekend. So I'm going to go with OpTic, and I think they'll get to 6-1 and knock Toronto down to 6-1.
All right, I guess we got a couple different, so that's good. But yeah, I'm gonna go with Toronto. I think they've been a cut above really so far. I've gassed them up a little bit too much now at this point, really, and for how early in the season it is. But especially, we've noted their success in search and destroy early on, and how important that is. Obviously, OpTic showed some ice just this past week of qualifiers with their comeback win there in Game 5 over LAT. So I'm excited to see how the search and destroys go down in this matchup, and I think that could be a deciding factor if OpTic is able to steal one of the searches. Obviously, if they stole both searches, then you're winning the series 3-2. But I do so game 2, my eyes will definitely be on it. If OpTic is really competitive in that search, they could have a good shot to come away with the victory here. But I'm gonna go with Toronto. It is a little weird that technically this is the Toronto major for Major One, even though it is in Madrid. So you can't. Can you consider it their home major? Like their home major would be in Toronto, but I know Champs is in Toronto this year. But it's I don't know how I would actually
Oh,
classify that
I mean
for
it.
Toronto.
Yeah, it's like a technically thing, but then it's really the Heretics home major, even though I believe they're also having a home major in Florida. So like
Yeah,
the Heretics are going to be the home team, I would imagine here, and maybe Toronto will be like second or third. I think Optic probably be second, and then Toronto
yeah,
will be third because they have the Madrid ties and stuff. But like Heretics are going to be just incredibly over with the fan base.
yeah. So that is. I mean, hey, that's in terms of thinking about it from that perspective. I hope Miami is able to pull something off this weekend. Obviously, we went over their matches and we both didn't pick them, but maybe they pull off an upset and just because we've talked about it before, like the quote unquote home team, you don't want to be in that position where you only get to play one match and it's a losers
Yeah.
bracket match and you lose, you're done. So, um, especially for the first of European CDL event in 5 years now, I think, might might be interesting to see more of Miami than just one series. But hey, we can, we'll figure that out by the end of this weekend if we get that or not, and we'll have to see what happens. But end of the day, yeah, I mean Toronto does have a couple EU players, and at this point, some longtime EU players, really in the grand scheme of things, and Insight and Kleenex. So, they'll be fan favorites regardless of whether you count this as a home series or home major or not for Toronto. But back to this particular qualifier to wrap it up before we get to the major in Spain, I am excited for Toronto versus Optic. Do think that game two search could have a major, just how it plays out. Keep an eye on that to see if that plays a major role in the outcome of the series. But give me Toronto here.
Yeah, it's going to be a great match. It feels like a great weekend for this. I have a hard time getting into like the first 2 weeks of qualifiers because it feels like everybody's just kind of feeling each other out and it doesn't feel like important at all. But these matches do feel important, especially like we've mentioned many times. But for this particular major, the fact that you have to travel so long and so far to get there, that feels like it makes it even more important to do well in these qualifiers and to not start in the loser bracket. And like if I'm rooting for one result this weekend, and it's just Miami to not finish in the losers bracket. Like I just want them to have two matches at the very least in their home country just to see the crowd, and I think that would be a really cool experience. I think that's what competitive Call of Duty needs because we haven't had a European CDL event since London, I believe, in 2020. So it's
Yep.
been almost 5 years since that's happened. I think it kind of sucks that we haven't seen a bunch of advertisement for how crazy this crowd is likely going to be, and how different it's going to be from normal American events or North American events with Toronto. But I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But we just have, I guess, one more weekend to get through before we can really enjoy that. The Pick'em so far this season, you are 29-15 on the season, and I am 25-19. Obviously, the major will be kind of a big one for the Pick'em, as the minor kind of was a big one in a bad way for me because the minor was not how I envisioned things going. But yeah, that about does it for us. A little bit shorter of an episode than usual, but they, the people on Twitter were a little less crazy than they have been in recent weeks. Even with the snaking stuff, it wasn't as intense as some of the things have been, in the last 2 or 3, 4 weeks. But who knows? We're getting there. I feel like people are going to get a little bit antsy. I think you're going to see stuff after the major just because there's going to be roster changes and there's probably going to be some hurt feelings. And I think people are going to be annoyed at the travel and how long they're going to be on their flights and stuff. So I would imagine there's going to be some drama over the next 3 or 4 weeks. But we'll see what happens with that. Subscribe, like, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music. Our YouTube channel, we have daily videos. So if you enjoy the podcasts, there are daily videos in the sense that I clip like 5 to 15 minute segments from the podcast episodes, and those are kind of spaced out over the matter of 2, 3, 4 days, whatever it may be. So if you like to just enjoy the podcast in shorter form and you want to kind of take little bits of information instead of the whole hour and a half long episode, then that's a perfect way to do so. So please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're almost at 200 subscribers on there. Follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast tours at Ego Chall Podcast. You can also follow Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink. That is JBINKK. He's streaming League of Legends every day. I believe he's up to like day 13, 14, something like that on the race.
14.
Our next show will probably be this weekend, this Sunday after the matches for the qualifiers. If not, we'll figure something out. But we really appreciate your support. We had a few people in the YouTube chat today, so that's awesome to see that we've had pretty consistent people here over the last, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks. I think the Pred one was the big one, the one that really kind of got the ball rolling, so to speak. But we appreciate you coming into the YouTube chat. If you want to watch on YouTube, you can. We do these live streams on Sunday nights and Wednesday nights. Obviously, it's like Wednesday early morning on the East Coast now, but that's just the way that we had to fit our schedules together at this moment in time. But if you want to do the live streams, you can go to the YouTube channel, just search up Ego Chall Podcast, or you can go to Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. But yeah, we'll be back at some point to talk about the matches, and next week we will preview the major, which is always fun. Some of the better episodes that we do, in my opinion. But we gotta get through these matches first. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Thank you guys as always. Shout out Anthony Molina coming in now just in the YouTube channel. Definitely a shorter episode and not as much to talk about this time around. But hey, that's the way the cookie crumbles. We are at that point where a couple months and weeks ago, we would have begged to be at this point where we're at the final week of online qualifiers heading into land just less than 10 days away now. I think at this point it would be it's like 8 days, 7 days, something like that. So yeah, really looking forward to first major coming up, but we got these qualifiers first this weekend, and that's gonna set the bar, set the stage for everything we see in Madrid. So looking forward to these last online matches. We'll be back on Sunday to break it all down for you guys, and thanks for the support as always. So remember to send the chow.